All right, you might be a poet who is thinking about poetry forms. Maybe you did or you did not ever really look at them in the past. Maybe you've never really thought about structure, meter, different schemes, and things like that. Well, today we're going to continue our analysis of different forms. We're going to be taking a look at a sestina, and guiding me in this process there is Christian. What's up, man?
What's up?
Hey, we're good, we're good. So this was kind of your idea, because so last week we looked at sonnets, and then you sent me a message and you're like, hey, let's take a look at sestinas.
Yeah.
Why a sestina? Was there anything that kind of came up to mind?
I mean, heard of I've heard of sestinas, but didn't really know what it was. So I kind of wanted to take a closer look at what exactly it is, what's a good example, and yeah. So I mean, I guess the whole general idea of this is getting to know more about form, and because I was talking to you last week about um I think like there's a divide in
Yeah.
poetry with people who, oh, I do spoken word, and people who do literary works, and
Yeah.
I don't really think that needs to be the case. So
Hmm.
I'm from the spoken word part. That's how I came up, but I want to learn more about form, and the importance of using constrictions and how it could even make
Hmm.
me better at spoken word.
100%.
Yeah.
And for those who don't know, Christian has, you've studied poetry before. You were in the retreat before. You've done some things. You're
Yeah.
trying to up your game in new capacities, which is great. And 100%, I think the more that we explore form, the more we understand that there is a lot of liberation that comes with restriction and constraints. The easiest example I give this a lot, is if I gave you a piece of paper, I'm like, hey, just draw something. That's really hard for a lot of people. But if I say, hey, like draw a cat, suddenly everything opens up,
Mhm.
and in the cat you draw might not be the same one I draw, and the same as, but suddenly the work becomes so much easier. And I think it's the same thing potentially with forms in poetry, is that when we do forms, it can actually open things up. So, all that said, let's begin just with a real quick look at what does a sestina even mean. Okay, so this is just from the Poetry Foundation. So we're looking at another French verse, lots and lots of different French verses, somewhat similar to a villanelle, which we can talk about in the future. Um, I'll be honest, the sestina is not my favorite form to write, because it's got it's got some set structures, and I think one of the things, I'll put it like this: it can be challenging to write a sestina where your reader doesn't know that you're writing a sestina. At some point, it becomes
Yeah.
very obvious that, oh, this person's writing a sestina. Like, it can be difficult to mask. So there are times when I've read some sestinas and I'm like, oh wow, I didn't even know this was a sestina. And so like you go back and look at the things and you're like, okay. So I think that's one sign of a form done well, when you don't even know it's in the form. Um, but I'm just going to highlight some of the quick things that we want to consider with sestinas. So first thing, this is your structure. And what this is talking about is basically you're going to have different stanzas, right? So this is your first stanza. First stanza is the easiest one to write. Okay. Your second stanza is then going to start switching things up. And one of the patterns that you're going to start noticing is, in general, there's other things happening, but in general, your last line becomes your first line. So that way it's kind of similar to Villanelle and stuff. So you can see like your sixth in my second stanza is now going to be my first line. And I'm going to end on whatever word I ended on in my first stanza for line number 3. Okay, so all of these rows are different stanzas. This is stanza 1, this is stanza 2, this is stanza 3. We'll talk about this, what this is doing in a moment. Okay, but basically, you're going to see that every single stanza we're kind of just mixing up the order, and it gets kind of crazy. Okay, the last part of a sestina, you're going to end with 3 lines. And in fact, they even mention it up here. The ending is your envoy. Okay. And your envoy needs to have all of your words. So basically, what we're going to see with this sestina is that there's going to be 6 words that end each line, and every line is going to end with one of those 6 words. In the last 3 lines, we're going to need basically whatever word ended your 6th line in your first stanza, and whatever ended your 2nd, then your 1st and your 4th, and then your 5th and your 3rd. If you're like, Geoff, I still don't really understand what's happening, maybe just a real quick example before we dive into the analysis. Here's an example of a sestina by Rach Jackson. So you can see the words that repeat. We see there's harvest, harvest, keep going down, harvest,
Okay.
harvest. We can see harvest keeps repeating. And then she's kind of, and this is the thing with sestinas, you can kind of, people mix up the order and stuff like that. So she's made a variety of different lines here. You could also just make them, instead of having a 6-line final stanza, you could just have a 3-line final stanza. She's broken it up more. Okay. That was her stylistic choice. So instead of having 6 lines, this could have been 3 lines condensed. Okay. But again, you kind of see that the words get repeated, 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 repeated. To give another example, let's see what happens with the second word, right? So the second word, useful, is now here. Then it's going to drop down here. Then it's going to drop down here. Then it's going to drop down here, and so on and so forth. So you see, the words just kind of keep moving around in
Yeah.
an order. So it can be, if you're new to writing sestinas, it can be very helpful to have your little map next to you, because otherwise it can be confusing. Any questions so far about the structure?
Yeah. So, just recapping, all these numbers just represent the stanza.
The
Um,
the rows represent the stanza. So, for instance, this is stanza 1. Stanza 1 has 6 lines. This is the end of line 1. This is the end of, sorry. This is the end of line 2. This is the end of line 3. This is the end of line 4. This is the end of line 5. This is the end of line 6. So you can see all of her stanzas, for instance, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
okay.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So let's
And
use
then in
again
a traditional sestina, the last stanza would be 3
3 lines.
couplets.
Exactly. Not 3 couplets. It literally be 3 lines. You could just
Oh,
do as
just
3
3
lines.
lines.
And then 2 words per line. Okay. So my first line needs to have word 2 and word 6. My second line needs to have word 1 and word 4. And this is where things get really messy. Okay. Because you can have a great sestina through here, but trying to make all those words work one more time in a much more condensed space is challenging
Yeah.
without sounding forced. Um, and in fact, if you're really, really technical about it, um, even where you put the words, so for instance, in theory, for those last 3 lines, like number 6, your word 6 should come in the middle of the line, word 2 should be at the end of the line. Word 1 should be in the middle of the line. Word 4 should be at the end of the line. Word 5 should be in the middle of the line. Word 3 should be at the end of the line. So you would expect in a very traditional sestina that your first line of your last stanza will end on word 2. Your second line will end on word 4. And your third line will end on whatever your word 3 is.
Okay.
Fun.
Yeah, this is kind of crazy.
It's
Uh,
it's not. I'll be honest. I don't really find it fun to write. I would rather write a villanelle or Pantone. Like
it
there's other
sounds
forms that are more fun.
mathy. Like it sounds like it sounds, yeah, it's like
So
math formula to it.
it's very much the first ones you write. Again, you're probably going to be referencing the order frequently. Um, and in fact, look at this example that we're looking at. When you look at a lot of sestinas, they don't follow that strict order because of this very
Yeah.
reason. And in fact, look at some of the things that she's doing. So she's writing this Sestina, but she's not following meter. How do I know she's not following meter? Well, look at some of her line lengths. Like, for instance, if she's following meter, there's no way that you can have a line at this short,
Yeah.
right? There's also coincidence, like, she also has some really long lines. Like, she's technically breaking form because this is extending onto the next. Like, you would need that to fit on one line, you know? So it becomes pretty clear that she's not strict with this. Um, if you were following meter, you could do things like iambs, like da 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 da, like that would be like your iambic pentameter or stuff like that. She's not doing that. Um, there's also like rhyming sestinas as well. We'll wait for Christian to come back. So you can have your end words potentially rhyme. I've tried doing that. Again, it gets a little messy in your envoy at the end of your sestina if you're trying to rhyme them. Okay. Um, So if you're dead set on writing a sestina, it's okay to be flexible. Don't feel like you have to follow all the strict rules and things like that. I think, especially the first couple of times you write sestinas, give yourself some grace, be
Yeah.
forgiving. Um, your first sestina is not going to be the best sestina in the world, most likely. Okay, it's just
So,
not the goal.
um, traditionally, do sestinas have a set um meter?
You can. I'll put it like this: the times I've written sestinas, I generally try to keep it to a meter because I
Oh,
think I think that's part of the restrictions of a lot of forms. Because if you don't set to a meter, then you can just you can just end a line whenever you want, right?
yeah.
So I think that kind of, I don't know, I think that takes some of the fun out of it. Um, that being said, if that's really frustrating you when you do this, then don't do it, you know?
Yeah.
But you certainly can. I was mentioning a moment ago, you can also do rhyming sestinas. I've tried doing some rhyming ones before. Um, it gets tricky again once you get down to your envoy, trying to make that work. Um, the other thing I'll say with sestinas too is ideally you're picking a word that you can use in multiple ways or play with. Like for
Yeah.
instance, if I use a word like maybe one of my words is the word like before,
Hmm.
right? So now what I can do is if I'm trying to make this work, maybe I don't just use before. Maybe another one of my versions of that is maybe I just use the word or, right? It's like a slant. So I can have a
Hmm.
line that ends on or instead of ending on before. Or maybe instead of before, I can use like the number for, right? Or I could just use like the preposition for, right? So because the word I picked for my repetition has all these sounds to it, it has for, it has or, it has different spellings that all achieve the same sound. I can play with this. It gives me a greater flexibility than say if my last word is the word orange, well, I can't. I could play with like range or things like that, but I'm a little bit more limited
Yeah.
compared to my options. Okay, so if you can give yourself some words that allow you some wordplay, that can help also keep things fresh.
Mm.
Because I think that's one of the things with form is, I was reading a book called My Trade is Mystery by Carl Phillips, and he said something that I really agree with, which is that good art, not just art, but good art has to contain an element of surprise. And if I'm doing a form and all my lines are ending on certain words, it's hard to surprise my reader unless I start getting a little bit creative with things like this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the more I can change how my reader interprets the poem, or I can do things that they're not expecting, the greater likelihood that I'm able to create a piece that can survive. So to recap, we want to be careful with our end words to make sure that they can be something that I can use in multiple ways. Like maybe if I have a noun, like for instance, maybe one of my words might be fish. Well, the nice thing about fish is I can, buy fish as a noun, but I can also fish as a verb, right? Okay. So I can play with that, or I can make an adjective. I can say like fishy, or I can say like
Yeah.
fish scales or things like that. So I can change the meaning. Yeah, it's the same word, but I change the meaning of it.
So homophones.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which that's in spoken word, we just call that a bar.
You know.
Battle rap, yeah, they
Mm-hmm.
definitely use that a lot. So that's
100%.
interesting hearing that that can also translate in form.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Okay. Um, I want to mention something that Rach is doing here. So I have to head out in about 5-10 minutes. If we get into poem, great. If we just talk about form, like Sestina's general, that's cool too. Um, she's doing something here that's not my favorite. I'll be honest. The thing that she's doing is I want you to just look at the ends of each of her opening lines. And what you're going to notice, everything is end stopped. When you have a line that ends on punctuation, another name for that is often like caesura. Okay. When you have a word that ends, like when you have a line that ends with this stuff, it kills your momentum. It's like we kind of want to think of lines. They're almost like freight trains. Okay. And a freight train is one of those things that it takes a lot of energy to make a freight train move just because they're so heavy. They're carrying a lot. They can be a mile long, right? But once the freight train moves, not even very fast, they can even just be moving like a mile an hour. But it's really hard to stop it because it's just pure physics. Okay. And our lines are kind of like freight trains. It takes time to build up momentum. And so every time that you add in these periods and things like that, you're basically telling your reader, stop, break. And so what's happening here is each of these lines is so independent. Like your hands are no more worth than tree stumps at harvest. That's a complete thought. Don't sell my parchment, make myself useful. Braid secrets and scalps on summer days for my sister. What's happening? Every single line is its own little unit. It's very independent, you
Hmm.
know? And so if we kind of think of, like, imagine you had to make a chain. You can't make a chain with 6 independent loops. That's not a
Yeah.
chain. It doesn't work. It's just going to fall apart. You can't do anything. You have to link things together. So I would say for any form you do, sonnets, sestinas, villanelles, whatever it is you're working on, enjambment is your friend. Finding ways to keep the line moving across is something that can kind of propel your reader forward, and it makes things feel much more connected. This is true across lines. This is also true from stanza to stanza. Okay. You don't want a stanza to feel like a complete thought. You want the stanza to lean into the next stanza. Okay, so trying to make things feel connected. Try not to kill the momentum. If you do have to kill the momentum, see if you can do it midline. You know, to give a real quick example, like this isn't a sustain. I'm gonna put something in the chat just as an example. Like compare these two lines. It's not gonna let me do it the way I want. Okay. Imagine if instead of this, imagine that period is 2 lines. Like your hands have no worth. Don't sit on my porch. Actually, let me type this in words. That's going to be even easier. Give me a sec.
Okay.
Let's talk a little bit about the importance of enjambment because this is going to make any form you do feel a lot more natural as well. Let's just kind of play around with line breaks a little bit. If it lets me. 1 second. Okay. All right, can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So what I'm going to show you, this isn't going to work for her sestina, right? But look, this is very independent. What if, though, I do something like this? See how different this feels already than
Yeah.
Yeah.
this? This one forces you to keep moving forward. And in fact, it also changes the meaning, right? Because now each of these lines can be read one way, but then the enjambment also allows you to read them other ways as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Whereas this closes things off. It doesn't allow any of that play. Okay, and the momentum dies at the end of each line. So as you guys are raking your own forms or your own sestinas, that's something I would encourage you to play with as well. Try not to just have every line end on a period. Try not to have your stanza end on a complete thought. See if you can propel me forward. Okay.
Okay. Um,
I do have to head out in a moment, but I also want to make sure that we feel generally comfortable with sestinas. What are some other things that I can try to help you with here?
I think for Sestinas, no, I think it actually makes sense. Um, it would just be like I guess reading some more. Um, obviously reading the example we didn't have time to read, and some like more traditional Sestinas as well to
Yep.
know how people might have broken it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, but I do want to think about what next form we could look at, but also next week I would like to discuss more about line breaks and
Yeah.
yeah, when we should do a line break, when we should have a say sure or use enjambment, like because
Mm-hmm.
for your example, I mean you just kind of quickly did it, but like what is the thought that goes behind um translating that on the page in a
Mm-hmm.
convincing way? That's something
Facts.
that I want to learn more about.
It's not an exact science. Okay, you ask 10 poets how they do it, you're going to get 10 different answers. What I can say, though, and I'm happy to explore this more, is we have to stop being safe. Okay? Because as long as we stay safe, we're never going to be able to push our art to where we need to push it. And not being safe means we need to be willing to make mistakes and we need to be willing to be wrong. So when we're doing our line breaks, we have to be willing potentially to lose some readers. Okay. And
Yeah.
the more willing I am to do that, to take the risk, because I might lose them, but I might not, and I might end up with something that's even better. Because when I look at this Sestina right now from Rach, the choices are relatively safe in terms of where we ending things, and you can again see she's very set on having the Sestina end on all the lines for a Sestina, but it comes at a cost. I don't want to say it cheapens the Sestina, but she's kind of. If I'm just willing to have one line be super, super short and my next line be super, super long just to hit the form, well, that's. I mean, yeah, you did it, I guess. But I don't know. Like, I don't. If I'm playing basketball, I don't want the net I shoot on to be one rim, but the team I'm playing against they have to play on a double rim. I don't want that
Right.
personally. You
Yeah.
know, I want everyone playing under the same guidelines. You know, um, but that's my own take, right? And you can
Hmm.
see just look how everything's ending on periods, right? You
Yeah.
know, so I think we had some opportunities potentially to play a little bit more when I'm looking at this. Okay. Now that's not to say that thematically or the poem itself is wrong. You know, I was reading this. I like the themes. One of the things that you can do is look at what each stanza, what's the central message of each stanza, and things like that. And I think there's some really solid things here. From a form perspective, I think there's some opportunities to take some more chances.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yes. Cool.
All right. And again, for anyone interested in this Sestina and kind of seeing what's going on, form-wise, again, this is Sestina for a Black Girl Who Doesn't Know How to Braid Hair by Rach Jackson. If you're looking for other Sestinas, there's literally a poem by Elizabeth Bishop that originally we're going to look at called Sestina. There's other Sestinas as well. So those might be some ones to look at. But if you just like Google famous Sestinas, you'll see some of the classic ones that are taught in academia. Okay,
All right. Thank
cool.
you so much.
Hey, man, always good to see you. We'll talk next week, okay?
All right.
Cool. Hey, take care, guys. Bye. Bye.